Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, August 29, 2019 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And if you feel comfortable, would you please join the HRA members and myself in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, you're perfectly content to say. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And now, roll call, please. Ms. Allison?
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Commissioner Brindle. Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning. Director Neal, anything that you want to modify on the agenda, or anyone else?
No, Your Honor, nothing from staff.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion to approve the form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning?
So move.
Second.
A motion second to approve the meeting agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then community comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them this morning? All right. Hearing nothing and seeing nothing. No one coming forward. We'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, and that is the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the HRA that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. And a motion second to approve the consent agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And we are on to Roman 7, which is reports and recommendations. Wait a minute. Excuse me. Items off consent. So we're on to reports and recommendations. I jumped right by. I was thinking about Mr. Neuendorf, but he was on the consent. And Stephanie Hawkinson is with us this morning, our Affordable Housing Development Manager, and she has a matter for us to consider, which is the potential acquisition by the HRA of property at 4100 West 76th Street. Ms. Hawkinson, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Last November, I received authorization from you all to work with our legal advisors in drafting a purchase agreement for the HRA to acquire 4100 West 76th Street. The action was on hold during the financing application season as we did not want to run afoul of creating a choice limiting action that would render the applications ineligible. We have now received clearance from Minnesota Housing to move forward with this request. When applications, a choice limited action, as we had understood it, was if any change happens to the property for which there's an application, then the application, it would not get approved financing. They said that just changing ownership would not be choice limiting action as long as we didn't demolish the building or do anything like that, substantially change the building until we hear the results from the application cycle. So today, I am seeking approval for the purchase agreements between the HRA and the Twin Cities Land Bank to buy this site for $2.9 million and enter into a purchase agreement with Aon to sell the site for $500,000. The difference of the $2.4 million reflects the financing that was awarded to Aon in 2018, and we reinforced that approval last winter for the development of 70 units of affordable housing. 4100 West 76th Street is located in the Greater Southdale Small Area Plan District. It is currently a vacant one-story former recording studio that became obsolete with the changing technology. Directly north of the site is a more concentrated residential area. Initially, I was going to go through all our community quality of life surveys and our Vision Edina and all the documents that showed that there's support for the creation of affordable housing. But I felt a little bit like a broken record, and I figure you all know that there is some desire to create affordable housing, so I'm going to skip some of that. And just say that the creation of affordable housing at this location is supported by the Greater Southdale Small Area Plan, which calls for an increase of housing choices and opportunities. The proposed development is still going through the site plan review and regulatory process, so you will, as the City Council, will have an opportunity to look more thoroughly at the design and the building aspects, the physical plans. Some of the history is that Aon gained site control of this property, 4100, in May 2018 with the intention to create a 100% affordable housing development. As it typically takes many application cycles for affordable housing development to get fully funded, the Twin Cities Land Bank agreed to acquire the site and hold until all the funding was secured. Although the land bank is a great option and has been maintaining the property, the cost for this is to Aon and the development is $20,000 a month in interest and holding costs. Over the course of the holding period between when Land Bank bought it till financial closing, this could come to just shy of $500,000 of holding costs and interest. In order to save the development some of those holding cost expenses so the money could be reallocated to the building itself, in November I sought authorization for the HRA to acquire the site from the Land Bank and hold for Aon until the financing is secured. The HRA would acquire the site, as I said, for $2.9 million, which is the same amount the Land Bank paid. The source of the funds would come from the Southdale 2 TIF pooled funds, as this acquisition complies with the 2016 special legislation. The HRA holding costs would be nominal and paid for out of funds that Aon will place in escrow. The HRA would also enter a purchase agreement with Aon to sell the site for $500,000 once Aon secures all their financing, including the 9% credits. The discounted price reflects the $2.4 million awarded to Aon via Resolution 2018-04. Some of the highlights of the purchase agreement with Aon. So, they have to comply with certain things before we'd sell it to them for this discount, is that they will have plans to develop 70 units of affordable housing that will contain 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. They'll pay $50,000 in earnest money at the time of closing with us. At the time that we close with the Land Bank, excuse me. They will place $80,000 in escrow to help pay for the legal fees, property taxes, maintenance, whatever costs that the HRA would accrue. They will continue to pursue their financing and regulatory approvals to move the project forward. And then the final closing will occur by October 29, 2021. Now, that is a year plus later than we anticipate the closing will be, but on the purchase agreement, we just allowed for another application cycle. It's already been through one full application cycle. We are waiting for the results, the awards that will happen in November and December. In case it was a very competitive year again this year, we just built in some time for another application cycle. So why would you consider doing this? It helps facilitates the creation of new affordable housing. The HRA would maintain site control of this site, even if something were to happen that we don't anticipate, and Aon were to go away. The HRA would then have control of the site where they could seek another affordable housing developer. It saves, this is on the low end, to roughly $240,000 in interest and holding costs. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And it demonstrates how that special legislation can be used. So with affordable housing developments, since rents are fixed, and so you can only leverage a certain amount of debt because the rents are capped, tax credits are pretty much capped because they're based on eligible basis of the development costs, and there's a cap that is allowed by Minnesota Housing on how many tax credits they'll award. Then they go and they get funding from us and from Hennepin County, which is a fixed amount. It's unlikely that if costs go up, they can go back to Hennepin County or go back to Minnesota Housing, possibly come back here and say, oh, whoops, all of a sudden the cost for lumber has increased tremendously, we need more money. It's usually prior to going out for bid, they have a fixed total development cost. So if some of that money is spent on interest and holding cost, it's not being spent elsewhere. So if we reduce the costs of interest and holding costs, that money can be diverted elsewhere. It can be for upgrades and carpeting. It could better lobby furniture and artwork, landscaping. It could augment something else in the building, since the TDC, the total development cost, tends to be stable. What are the risks? We go ahead, you approve this, the HRA owns the land. What are your risks for doing this? If we're using Southdale TIF funds, it restricts the site for affordable housing. If something happens again to Aon and we need to seek another developer, it would have to be for affordable housing. There is interest that is being generated by the TIF money that would be lost, and you are holding the property. So as we were optimistic. There is this closing scheduled for tomorrow. Part of it is because it's the end of the month.
That's a strong level of optimism.
It's a little optimistic.
Or confidence, I would say.
It's like tomorrow morning. So part of that is because we wanted to save another month of interest. We thought it's the last day of the month. Let's not move into September. Aon anticipates receiving financing awards, as I mentioned, in November, December. That would be from the Met Council. They're still waiting for Met Council and Minnesota Housing. And then it takes 6 to 8 months after financing awards to actually get to closing, where we would then, the HRA would then convey the property to Aon at the financial closing. So are there any questions?
Questions from HRA members? Commissioner.
On the staff report, there's a sources and uses chart, and part of that lists TIF financing as part of the source of the funds. Can you help me understand how that fits into this?
Chair, Commissioners, indeed. In 2018, when awarded the 2.4 in gap financing, TIF was also awarded to this project. So in addition to that 2.4 million, there is 925,000 that was awarded in TIF. So this is a TIF district.
So the total support from the city is in the neighborhood of 3.3 million.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Other questions from Ms. Hawkinson? Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. Couple of questions quickly. The loss of interest here is actually pretty minimal, I think. Are we about 2% on the reserve account there? At Southdale too?
Yeah, Don's out here. Our finance director is approaching the lectern.
Chair, members of the commission. Right now, the money is in our money market account, which is currently paying less than 2%, approximately 1.9. Interest rates are going in the wrong direction for us from an earnings perspective. So the interest will be minimal.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Then just a brief question. $925,000 is the TIF district that was created. What's the decertification date of that? How long is that? Do you recall?
I am going to defer to Mr. Neuendorf.
Thank you. Yes, that's
in reference to my last meeting.
For this project, we established a special housing TIF district, which has a 20-year term.
20.
I believe we established that in 2018.
Okay.
Chair, Commissioner, for this project, the affordability period, however, would be 40 years.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. That's all the questions I have, I think. Thank you.
All right, you answered one of the questions I had, and that was dealing with if Aon does not get its funding, what are the financial risks for the HRA? And Commissioner Anderson just touched on the loss of the interest income. I find it interesting that Land Bank, which was, I don't know, maybe formed 10 years ago, for purposes like this, to hold money for affordable housing is charging 6.5% interest. Maybe it all depends on what they're paying for money, but though the interest rate is 2%, I'm wondering if you could have a conversation with the Land Bank about whether they've got enough margin to reimburse us for our lost interest for that period of time until this matter closes. It'd be a little unusual for them to do that, but this is the business they're in, you know, and we're trying to spread our dollars too for affordable housing purposes. So even 2% on $2.5 million is not inconsequential over if we had to wait for a 2-year cycle to occur. Anyway, have that conversation with them, please.
Indeed.
And then the fact that this district, the fact that this money from the Southdale TIF district has been committed, you know, with proper use for affordable housing. If Aon doesn't get its funding, will those funds still be available if we have to wait several years to be able to deploy them? Or do we face some kind of risk there that a delayed closing or no closing puts us in a position where we can't use that money for the purpose that we want to use it for? Because we have to spend this money. We have to spend down this money within a certain period of time.
Yep.
So I'm a little bit concerned about that, even though we've designated this to have an affordable housing use at this site. Is there any risk of us not being able to deploy those funds with somebody else within the time period in which we have to deploy this money?
Chair, there is some risk. There's always some risk. It's minimal in this case. The special legislation that governs these monies require that the TIF district be established and that the monies be allocated by December of 2021. There's not a hard deadline as far as when the monies must be spent, but obviously when we take the action, we hope they're invested sooner than later. Typically, if you are delaying multiple years, at some point the Office of the State's Auditor would jump in and raise a flag and tell you that you missed your timeline. That's extremely rare. I don't know if that's ever happened. So there is a small amount of risk, but I believe it's manageable.
Okay, so have you seen any definition of the word allocated anywhere? When you say by December 2021 funds need to be allocated, what does that mean?
My intention there was that the HRA and City Council should declare the intended use and amount of the money, but it doesn't have to be an escrow. It doesn't have to be under contract necessarily, but there needs to be a clear direction and an intention for those funds.
I think I'd look at that issue in terms of what, you know, we have a definition for what we think means allocated. Is the state that flexible that they'll let us define allocation? Or is there some rule or regulation that defines allocation?
Yeah. And Your Honor,
Director Neal.
Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, and members of the Commission, this is a question we have been looking at not only for this site, but if you'll recall, we examined it a number of times for the Pentagon Park discussion as well. Is what does it mean to have money committed or allocated by a certain time? So we will define that. But the item that I wanted to get to, or the point that I wanted to raise is there is, of course, risk in going forward with this. I think there's as much or perhaps even more risk of not going forward with any of these, with future expenditures of this money. We made a strong case at the legislature that we needed this special authority to assist the city with creating more affordable housing units in the community. And I think we need to demonstrate to them that we are serious about it and that we want to do it. So we have a limited time frame, as you say, and these projects take a long time to bring to this level where they are ready for an approval. So we're working hard on that, and we're trying to use this money as prudently as we can.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a universal opinion on the one that you just expressed, or consistent with the one you just expressed. But I think, you know, in a broader sense, when you think about these funds need to be allocated by December 2021, let's make sure we know what that means.
We
We got a
will.
common view of the world on what allocation means with the state, so that we can indeed get all of this money allocated by December 2021.
Agreed.
Because we don't want to get caught in a situation where we set up this district solely for the purpose of affordable housing and not be able to use it.
Right.
Okay, good. Let's see here. I guess we just need a simple motion. There's no resolution. So is there a motion to approve the acquisition of 4100 West 76th Street for $2.9 million from the Twin Cities Land Bank and enter into a purchase agreement with Aon to sell the property to them for $500,000 contingent on them obtaining their financing, obviously?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We've got a motion second to approve the acquisition of 4100 West 76th Street for $2.9 million from the Twin Cities Land Bank and enter into a purchase agreement with Aon to sell the property for $500,000 based upon certain contingencies developed by staff. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Yeah, I
Oh,
do.
yeah, discussion, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you for
Thank
that.
you. So I was at the meeting where this was first discussed, and I remember the conversation clearly. Then Councilmember Stewart was expressing concern about the city acquiring property of any kind for a hold for this type of use. I don't necessarily share that concern, and I think that this is a good use of funds. I like the mechanism a lot because I think it takes the risk out of it. But when I move through the table, I see how we have allocated funds coming out of Southdale 2 for other similar projects or affordable housing projects in any event. So I take a look here, I can see that on Sandell, we committed $350,000. That was an existing property, naturally occurring affordable housing. On Amundsen, net, if I understand this correctly, net, we are, I think, 700 for that. And so I look at and neither one of those, of course, feature a TIF district. Then I look at what we're doing here, and I see that we are, the exposure, the risk is a concern. I believe that the Southdale 2 district, that's a decertification date there is December of 2021. Is that accurate?
Correct, that's what
Yeah,
I think
okay.
member or Mr. Newendorf just stated.
Yeah, so, you know, I share your concern that if there's any question about commitment of the funds on the decertification date, how does that get handled with the state? That would be a concern. I also have a concern about the amount. I think that it's out of proportion to what we have been doing based on what I'm seeing. And then I look to where we'll be after this at about 3.5 whenever Amundsen is able to reimburse this 600. And I think, well, okay, we're getting pretty skinny here. And so basically we're working for the next 2 years with 2.4. We're committing 2.4 plus the 5 here today, along with, as Commissioner Staunton brought forward, a TIF district for 925, and we get to 3.3 on that site. And to me, it's out of proportion. And I can support a lower amount, and I think that there is an amount that should go forward here, and it should be supported, absolutely. I just think that 3.3 is a lot, and as I say, out of proportion. And I'd like to be looking to other projects to be able to spread these funds around a little bit more. Given the timeline, I understand it, but that would be a concern for me. It's actually, when I think about it, it's really 3.3 plus another 240. So we're really looking at about 3.5 that's being awarded this project. So to me, it seems out of sync.
Ms. Hawkinson?
Chair, Commissioners, the balance on that chart of 6.9 million was based on the end of 2018. I believe the forecast for when that district closes is closer to 15 million. So it's significantly greater than what is showing here. So there will be significantly more than 3.5 million remaining that needs to be spent or allocated by 2021. With regards to the amount that has been awarded towards this project, that has already been approved via resolution and reinforced via resolution. It was approved in 2018, the 2.4 plus the TIF district. And then the approval of those amounts was reinforced a year later, this past winter. So those funds have already been awarded via resolution.
Question, if I may.
Sure. Commissioner.
Okay, so the 15 million, so we have, my recollection is 40% of that reserve fund is dedicated to affordable housing. So it's really 40% of the 15. Is that accurate? No?
Yeah, Chair and members of the commission. So as Stephanie has just indicated, the tax increment district is collecting, we expect in excess of $6 million this year. So over the next couple of years, it'll be roughly 18 million. So our projections, which we will present to the HRA at a future date, is 15 million for affordable housing.
I see. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
Just a couple of
Son.
questions. So on the chart where we talk about 7075 and 7079 Amundsen, as I understand, as I read the chart and as Commissioner Anderson read the chart, that's $700,000 from the TIF, the Southdale TIF to TIF. Is that right?
Chair, Commissioners, that is correct.
But in addition to that, there was a acquisition of the property by the Housing Foundation. Can you remind us what the funds were that were, how that transaction went and whether there's any support contained in that transaction?
Chair, Commissioners, the Housing Foundation, using their own proceeds, acquired the property and is paying all the holding costs. In July, I came before this body to see if the HRA would be willing to acquire the property from the foundation for 1.3, which would be their acquisition and holding costs and their sales price for the property. That was approved. And then at the time that the property, then the HRA would sell it to the end developer for $600,000. So $700,000 would stay in the property. So there'd be an outlay of 1.3, but you'd be getting 6 back.
So that's where the $700,000 comes from.
That's
as
where the
part of that whole transaction. And
That's part of it.
otherwise, there wasn't any support from the city. How many units in that Amundsen project again?
62.
So that per unit, do you know the per unit support on that one?
Due to
guess
my
I'd
head
have to do
cold,
the
I
math.
can't do the
7.
math very quickly right now.
So about 10,000 per
It is
unit?
significantly greater with, level of support is significantly greater on the AN property per unit, granted. AN, part of their model is they do have a lot more services for the residents that come out of the operating costs, so their NOI tends to be lower. Their projects don't average the same level of debt. So they need additional gap financing due to a lot of the services they provide in their building.
Okay, so it looks like we're in somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 per unit for the Amundsen project, and somewhere around 47 to 50, depending on whether you count the carrying costs on the AN project. Is that right?
Without a calculator, I will, yes.
Yeah, you've got a chart to that effect too, I
Yeah.
think, subsidy per
Yeah.
unit.
But our policy
Yes.
on the buy-in fund is 100,000, is that right?
That
Per
is
unit?
correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Fisher.
So I appreciate the commissioner's comments about, what's the level of financing we're doing, how does it compare to the others? What I recall is when we were first talking about this project, it was the first one. And I remember specifically talking about having no relative way to measure, how far do you go in, how does this compare? Now, because it's taken time for them to get this financing, other projects have come along and all of a sudden we have some comparisons. But I would argue that
we've made commitments to this one based on what we knew at the time, and I think we have to follow through with that commitment. The action today, you know, in terms of helping sort of change how we're bringing our money to the table in a way that saves, you know, makes the project more effective, I think it's a creative solution. It makes a lot of sense. I think we'll look back and have a better, you know, the next one that comes to us, we're going to have a much better comparison and be able to decide, you know, what's the best way to deploy this money. But also for the reasons discussed here, I think our bigger issue in the next couple of years is going to be finding places to deploy the money. And I would never advocate for spending it frivolously or not, you know, being good stewards of the money. But I actually think we're spending it well here. And the reason I was looking for the picture, and then I realized, oh, it was in their presentation. It's not in our iPads. But when I look at this project with the level of affordability it has, and then look at the aesthetic value, look at the amenity value, you know, the underground, there's a lot of things happening in this project that just don't happen in affordable housing, especially affordable housing at this degree. And so I think that's really what we're bringing to the table. It's something that we all feel really proud of and fits in our community beautifully and still achieves these goals. And that's why I've felt pretty comfortable with where we are, though I really appreciate your perspective on it. And I think moving forward, this is exactly, you know, the more experience we build up, the better we're going to be able to weigh, you know, what level of support we really want to give on these projects.
Good. Thank you. Manager Neal, you and I yesterday had this conversation that Commissioner Fisher alluded to, and that was that by December 2021, if we want to deploy these funds, we may have to get a bit creative without, and being good stewards of the money along the way. I'm trying to recall back as well in time when we first approved this project. Commissioner Anderson wasn't on the council or the HRA at that time. I think I remember Staunton making a comment that, well, we're bringing in money under the policy at $100,000 a door, and we're basically deploying it back out at about $30,000 a door, and that's what our numbers looked like at the time, and they've risen slightly since then. I guess more than slightly, they've risen by about 50%. But still, to me, as Commissioner Fisher says, I think because of the fact that we've already made this commitment, that it was the first one we worked on. We weren't certain as to how to deal with this affordability issue in terms of the level of subsidy. We knew affordable housing was going to be expensive. We just didn't know how much we were going to have invested in it. And we've had some good luck along the way with Sandell and Amundsen at a much bigger bang for the buck per door than we have here. But I think we're in on this one. You know, and so this just seems like the next logical step to take some pressure off of the financing side of it for Aon and makes sense from an HRA standpoint. So I'm going to support this today too. So we have thanks for those comments to Commissioner Anderson. So we've got a motion, we've got a second. Any other conversation? All those in favor of the motion as stated say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Carried. All right, anything from a correspondence standpoint?
No.
Director Neal? All right. Any HRA Commissioner comments? This is our only business matter of the day, our only action item. All right. Any Executive Director comments?
None from me.
Oh, I have a question. Mr. Chair, you, at a previous meeting, you talked about a symposium or something that you're going to be on the panel for coming up. And I think it is at the same time as one of our HRA meetings in the near future.
Same morning that.
At the first HRA meeting.
Business Journal. Yeah.
But it looks like you will be able to go directly from this meeting to that in terms of time. I think. We'll look at it again. September 12th.
I was thinking either. If the agenda was light, could we defer things to the following agenda and not have an HRA meeting that morning? Or if the agenda were sufficiently light, I've got to get up to Golden Valley.
We'll take a look at that.
But I think I'm on the first panel at 8 o'clock is what I was worried about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I'm just trying to decide if I should sign up to come and watch our illustrious chair speak. And, of course, I'm very responsible, and I would never want to miss an HRA meeting. So just needed clarity on that.
Got it. We'll get some clarity on that.
Or you could have 3 people here and have a quorum and get some real stuff done.
I think we're already missing another body, so.
Oh, all right. Okay, well, that's a good catch, and take a look at that. I think there was one other issue I was going to, I don't know if we may get this offline. I've got some, I was invited to a design symposium, City Design Group that the National Endowment for the Arts is putting on. Got invited to New York the very end of October, and they've asked us to pick a project in our town that there would be, I think, 7 mayors looking at, plus staff and design people from recruited by the National Endowment for the Arts, and may want to run some of these potential project ideas past HRA and council members to see what they think we should consider offering up as a project that we would work on collectively for design. I mean, so far I think we've thought about Fred Richards, the library site, when that becomes available.
Western
the
Promenade.
county. Yeah, the West Promenade. Maybe that would include Pentagon Park North. So give that some thought, and any input I would appreciate as we go about picking a project to work on with them. All right. Anything else? All right, we stand adjourned.